Hi there, this is Justin. In this video, I'm going to introduce you to SQL. My goal in this video is to explain SQL as simply as I can, and I'm going to try my best to not get overly technical. My goal really is that if you're very new to analytics or even don't consider yourself an analyst in any shape or form, but want to start improving your skill sets, then this video, if I do my job well, will help you understand what is SQL and get you on the path to actually learning the language. So let's start out by actually looking at the definition of SQL. And you can see here, I just ran a quick search on Google, SQL definition, and I had to remind myself exactly what it stands for. And you can see here that SQL stands for Structured Query Language. So this word at the end here, I want to start with language. SQL is a language, just like you might learn French as a language. So every language has rules, there's syntax, basically how you would write the language, and like learning French, you could spend your entire life learning French, and you probably still won't know the language perfectly. There's always things to learn, right? So same with SQL. I've been working with SQL for many years, but I'm learning new things all the time. So that's really the first thing. It's gonna take you a long time to really master SQL, but like any language, if you put in enough effort in the beginning, you can learn the majority of the core concepts relatively quickly and then actually start using the language really quickly, honestly. I mean, I learned SQL, the basics, over a weekend. It's not overly complicated in my opinion, but obviously everyone's different. Everyone learns at different speed. The good thing is there's a lot of free resources online to learn the language, and I might even cover one or two of those in this video. So that's the first thing. SQL is a language. Next key word here is query. Now what the hell is query, right? That sounds like a very technical term, and it is a technical term. So let's dive into this and let me help you understand what it means by query. And then the word structured is pretty straightforward. We're talking about a structured, so it's you actually build a query, and I'll talk a bit about that shortly. And that's essentially what SQL is. We're building a structured query, and it's basically a language in which we do that. So the next kind of idea that you need, the next piece of information that you need in order to understand SQL is that the word query is related to databases. So if you just stumbled across this video and you have no idea what SQL is, no problem. But essentially SQL is the language that we use to communicate with databases. That's why for business analysts that are working with, or not only business analysts, but any analysts that are working with data in the internet world, let's say, or in high tech, they're talking to databases using SQL. So I'm going to just jump into this Lucidchart to explain a few additional concepts, because once again, I want to try and really start from the bottom and go up. So I'm going to assume you don't even know what a database is. And if you don't, it's all right. In a minute, you'll know exactly what a database is. So I've got here a diagram that I built showing very, very basic diagram showing what a database is. So a database is a collection, it's basically one or more tables of data housed within, if we're talking about, cloud-based databases, it would obviously be sitting in the cloud. But database, just to keep things as simple as possible, is one or more tables of data. Now, what is a table? Table, I've got a screenshot down here. It's a collection of data that's structured in rows and columns. So if you've worked a lot with if you've worked a lot with Excel in your career, maybe in university, then you're very familiar with the concept of storing data or structuring data in rows and columns. So SQL is going to be the language that we use to communicate with tables of data. Either one table, and as you improve your skills at SQL, you can actually communicate with multiple tables using joins. I'm not going to get into that in this video, since this is very much an introductory video. So just to summarize up until now, SQL, structured query language, is a language that we would use to communicate with databases, and in particular tables of data inside a database. So here I've got e-commerce store database, just an example I made, and we've got a table holding all of our products, we've got a table holding all of our orders, we've got a table holding all of our customers. This is an example of maybe, you know, an online business, what their database might look like. Very basic example. So here we've got a table, as I mentioned. We can see here there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 columns of data, and we've got essentially one row of data per product. See the name of the product, etc. And then, like I said, we would write an SQL query to communicate with this table of data, which leads me to the next point. There's essentially 4 main things you would want to do using a query to talk with a database. And the 4 main commands you would say in SQL are listed here. We have select, we have update, we have insert, and we have delete. So we're going to be covering select. Since I put in bold here, it's 99% of the time you're going to be using select. Developers and data analysts and other technical data, what would you call it, data scientists, etc., would be doing a lot more updating, inserting, deleting. Business analysts, for the most part, will just be doing the select command. So let's go through these. Select is, like the word says, we're selecting data from this table to be returned to us. So if you think of a language, right, we send that query across, and then we're waiting for an output. We're waiting for something to come back. So select is the command that we're going to use to get whatever we want sent back to us. We're selecting certain data from the table. Update, we're going to be updating the table. Pretty straightforward. Either one row or multiple rows in the table, we might want to update. So if we just look at the screenshot, we see a size. Maybe when this was, one of these rows was, one of these products was recorded, there was an error. And over here in row number 3, we see this product, this row size is large. Maybe it's actually medium. We would want to update that row. Insert would be to add to the table. So we want to add a row of data to the table. Once again, as business analysts, we're not typically adding data to tables. We're just working with the data that's available. And then lastly would be delete. If we want to actually delete a row, maybe we want to delete half the rows or something like that. Also, once again, it's not something we typically do. It's also not typically it's not best practice to delete data. Not going to cover that in this video. So once again, we would write an SQL query to talk with a table, and to keep the scope of this video as narrow as possible, we're going to be focusing on the select command. So I'm going to now jump into BigQuery, which is a type of cloud-based database. This is Google BigQuery. And what I have in front of me is a table of data. This is from Google's what would you call it, your public data sets that they allow you to query, allow you to talk with. And we can see here we're looking at the table called full under the Hacker News dataset. So essentially this is just a table of data that's essentially scraped, I imagine, or getting from an API or something like that, from Hacker News. Now Hacker News is just a very popular, what would you call it, like forum or public forum where people can post links, and then you can see here people can comment and have discussions around different topics. Very popular among developers and, you could say, more technical types. So all the data here is being pulled into a publicly available data set within BigQuery. So if we look at this table schema, I never mentioned the word schema, but essentially a schema is just effectively it's the columns in the table. So go back over here, the schema for this table would, be made up of 7 columns, and we can see here product ID would be column 1, the name, product name, etc. So over here we can see it lists for us all the fields, gives us the type of the data. Not going to cover that in this video either. That's another topic. The mode, if the fields can be nullable. This is just a fancy way of saying, can they be blank? Can they have empty? Well, I've got to be careful with the words I use, but nullable just means can it be blank? Can it have blank values? And then here we have a description. So we can see here the title is a story title. We have ID, the items, unique ID, and etc. So as analysts, we need to understand, what is the schema of the table that we need to communicate with, so that we, know what we want to, if we're going to select data from that table, we need to know what's there, obviously, right? So first thing you got to do is kind of understand your data and learn it, understand what's available. So that's what we can do here. We can scan through the schema and see what's available to us. Then we can go ahead and write some SQL. So I've been talking for a good few minutes. Now we can finally actually look at a query. So what you see over here is an SQL query. I should also mention SQL is the language that you would use to communicate with all kinds of databases. So there's lots of different types of databases, and the vast majority would be relational databases. And all cases that I'm familiar with, you would write SQL to communicate with relational databases. So BigQuery is a form of relational database, and therefore we can write SQL to communicate with the data. So as we discussed a few minutes ago, we've got select. So we're going to start our query by by choosing the main command. And the way I like to think about select is we've got a table of data. If we click on preview, by the way, we can just scan through and get an idea of what we have here. We see titles are null, so that's just blank. URL is null. We have text. We see by, so this would be like the username of the person who posted the comment in this case. So we have type. And relatively, quickly in well-structured data sets, you can understand what we're dealing with. Right, so here we're talking about a comment. So this row number 1 is a comment. You can see the text here. We can see the timestamp, so when it was created. You can see it's in UTC, Universal Standard Time. It would be like GMT 0. So we can see when it was created. We have time here, which is just, I think this is a Unix version of this. Once again, I don't want to get too overly technical, but this and this are effectively the same. Just this is in a structure that the computers can kind of read. We know the type of the information, the content, and we have an ID, which is always useful. So an ID would be, a unique identifier for this record in the table. And I'm getting a bit off topic, but when we're writing a query to talk with a table of data, and we're going to be using the select command, the way I think about it is fundamentally what we're doing is we're sending a request to the database to return to us specific data from that table. Okay, and we start our query with the select command. Then what we're going to do is we're going to list the columns that we want to return. Once again, it's a pretty complicated language when you really get into the details of it. For this video, I want to give you the bare bone concepts and very, very simple aspects of writing a query. And then after this video, if you really want to go forward and learn the language, I'll give you some resources so you can go do that. So very basic, on a very basic level, we're going to be communicating with the table. We're going to write the select. We're going to list the columns. So as we saw, there's ID, there's text, there's type, there's timestamp. So we're going to list the columns. I'm just going to remove this for a second just to simplify things. Then we've got to say where do we want to bring this information, right? So there's the from. We're selecting these columns from this table, and then we have at the end limit 10, which I'm also going to get rid of for a second. And this would be a very, very bare bones SQL query, right? Where we're selecting the ID field, the text field, the type field, and the timestamp field from this table. That's it. So another way to think of the select command is we think of it almost like a CSV, if that's easier for you to imagine, which might have 10, 15, 20, 100 columns, and we can choose exactly what we want to return to us. Because in many cases, there might be information in the table which we don't care about. So in this case, if we go back here, we've got a whole bunch of fields here: deleted, descendants, ranking. In this example, I don't care about any of that. I just want to bring ID, text, type, and timestamp. Okay, so if we click on run, we can see here BigQuery is very nice. It tells us that the query looks good. There's no errors. By the way, if we did something like this, we made a mistake, then it's going to go red, and it says here unrecognized name type 123. So it's telling us there's no column in your table, there's no field in your schema which matches type 123. So it gives us an error. So if we go ahead and click on run, just give it a second, or 2, or 3, or 5. See how long it takes. We've now sent that query to the database, and it's running our command, our request, and it's going to return the values. And here you can see it's brought us ID, text, type, and timestamp, right? The 4 columns that we requested. So now, instead of bringing us everything, we've only got the fields that we care about. Now notice down here, it's showing rows per page, 100. You can see there's actually 30 million rows. So that's why it took some time. It says here it took almost 20 seconds to bring us the results, right? Because there's a lot of data here. 30 million rows is a lot. So if we go back up here to our query, maybe we want to make some changes, because here we have ID and text. We've got these columns that we brought, but what you can do in SQL is you can provide aliases. So if I do, for example, I list my field ID, I do as, and I write here content ID, what this is going to do is it's taking this field, but it's changing the name. It's changing the name and giving it an alias. It's giving it a new name of content ID. right? So if I rerun this, and this time it's processing another 30 million rows, so it's processing it to bring back 30 million rows, so we've got to wait again. Okay, this time it took a bit longer. What you'll notice now is we have content ID up here instead of ID. So I actually changed the name of the column to be content ID. And maybe I do that to provide additional context, right? So now I see content ID, I get a better idea of what I'm dealing with instead of just ID. And timestamp is very kind of up in the air. I want to write it as content created at. And created at will tell me it's a timestamp, where a timestamp is going to be, down to the second. You can see here, this was created on the 12th of the 12th, 2010, at 4 seconds, at 11 p.m., 5 minutes and 4 seconds, right? So this is an example of a timestamp. So I'll write created at to kind of indicate to me that this is a timestamp. So that's the first kind of nice tip in SQL, is you can change the returning column names and set aliases. And the last little piece I want to teach you is just limit. So limit is, here we can see there's 30 million rows. And if I'm just exploring my data, it makes no sense to bring back 30 million rows. So limit, what it's going to do is it's still going to run the entire query. If you notice up here, it says the query will process 10.1 gigabytes. So it's a lot of data that it's crunching through. If I remove the limit, it's still doing that, right? So it's not going to save me any, the cost associated with running this query is not going to change if I add the limit. But what it's going to do is, if I run it now, what it's going to do is it's just going to return to me 10 values. And you notice it was a lot quicker this time, 0.3 seconds, right? Because I'm only bringing back 10 queries. So if I scroll down, we can see there's now 10 rows. So I want to stop here. I hope this, I think I rambled maybe a bit too much in this video, but I do hope I did a good job of giving you the basics of SQL. I did mention I'll give you some resources, so let me just quickly do that. W3 Schools is a very good resource for learning all the, like kind of I would call basic languages, coding languages. You can see here you can learn HTML, CSS, and there's SQL, right? So we just talked about select. I didn't cover star, so come in here and read about that. But this is where I learned SQL initially, and they cover a lot of the, let's say, fundamentals and, straightforward commands and queries and functions, etc. So if you kind of go through this list to get to the end here, you'll know the vast majority of what you'll need to know in order to use SQL. So that's it. If you found this video helpful, please go ahead and hit the like button and consider subscribing. I'm going to be doing a lot more introductory type videos on a wide range of topics for business analysts and aspiring business analysts. So stay in touch, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.